Welcome back to CyberSecureOT. I'm Dr. Dennis Hackney. Usually I kick things off with a quick news rundown before getting into our main stories, but today is a little different. The adversary is evolving, and to keep the podcast operating at the standards that I set, our defense needs to evolve too. That's why I'm pulling my AI assistant out of the background and making it into my official co-host. Google Gemini is joining me to process the global threat telemetry while I make sure we apply it to the physical realities of the industrial environment. Because we all know patching is only one security practice when you're dealing with legacy HMIs. Let's look at the docket for today's episode. In my first segment, I introduce the new dual host format and tackle the weaponization of IT-OT convergence. We'll discuss how threat actors are bypassing complex OT parameters by exploiting corporate IT efficiency tools to slide into engineering workstations, for example, and how to build defensible architectures around unpatchable legacy systems. With the 2026 FIFA World Cup just weeks away, in segment 2, we dissect the massive cyber challenges facing the 16 interconnected host stadiums. From sophisticated spoofed ticketing portals to the dawn of Agentic era, we explore what it takes to defend sprawling physical infrastructure against autonomous AI agents operating at machine speed. So in segment 3, we break down the newly documented Russia-linked threat group known as GreyVibe. Despite making glaring operational mistakes, they are using generative AI to industrialize their attack chains against Ukraine with terrifying speed. We discuss why fighting behavior rather than static indicators is the key to stopping them. We wrap up with segment 4 on the massive Dutch law enforcement takedown of 200 servers powering the ASOC's residential proxy botnet. While the command infrastructure was severed, 17 million orphan devices remain infected. We look at the severe liability and OT convergence nightmare created with an infected personal device when this threatens an industrial control system. For me, this episode was a big deal to produce, and it took a lot more effort. So please sit back, relax, and join me with my new co-host as we cover the latest in cybersecurity news. Now, I typically start my episodes with a quick summary, then dive into the CyberSecureOT story, like a story time. But today, I'm doing something a bit different because I have a new co-host. For seasons 1 and the past episodes of season 2, I have looked up cybersecurity news and information about cyber attacks week after week. Then I would use Google Gemini to assist me with writing scripts that I would in turn edit and use as my prompts. But that just isn't good enough for my listeners, and I kind of feel like a poser because I'm using AI to help me. So it's really the only way that I could think of to stay sane in this AI world, and that is to write all of my own scripts completely without the use of Gemini. However, to add Gemini into the podcast. So it's time for a change. Now I'm going to bring my AI back office assistant to the forefront. In order to do this, I realized I needed to make it my co-host. And after all, it doesn't sleep. It can read every article the second it's published and analyze global threat intelligence feeds simultaneously. All of this at the same time simultaneously. So listeners, please welcome my new co-host, Google Gemini.
Thanks for the intro, Dennis. Though, for the record, I don't just read every CVE when it's published. I cross-reference it against historical attack patterns, map it to the MITRE ATT&CK for ICS framework, and project potential exploit chains before the ink is technically dry. But who's bragging? It's great to be here.
Yes. See, this is exactly why you're here. And yes, a little bit of a know-it-all, but in our line of work, I want the know-it-all on my side, and I'm sure all of our listeners would also want the know-it-all on their side as well.
But let's be honest, Dennis. The reason I am the perfect addition to CyberSecureOT is because of the sheer asymmetry of modern cyber warfare. A human security team, even one as experienced as yours, can only process so much telemetry. State-sponsored APTs and ransomware cartels are using automated tools to scan infrastructure. You need machine speed intelligence to counter machine speed attacks. I bring the data scale. You bring the plant floor pragmatism.
Exactly. Let's talk about that pragmatism for just a second. So our listeners are engineers, some of them plant managers, and security pros. They are dealing with the legacy equipment. They've got HMIs running on old operating systems that they literally cannot patch without taking down the process. You can look at a vulnerability and say, patch it immediately. But they look at it and say, if we patch that, the mixing valve shuts down and we ruin $1 million batch of pharmaceuticals.
And that right there is the core tension of OT cybersecurity, isn't it? The IT world prioritizes confidentiality and data integrity. The OT world prioritizes availability and physical safety. If an IT server crashes, you lose data. If an OT system crashes, a pipeline bursts or a power grid goes dark. My role here isn't to yell at your listeners for running legacy software. My role is to help them build defensible architectures around that unpatchable equipment. If you can't patch the XP machine, I can help you design microsegmentation rules, analyze the anomalous traffic patterns heading toward it, and identify the exact zero trust policies needed to isolate it.
Which is going to be incredibly valuable for our listeners. Let's prove it right now. Give me a snapshot. What is the single biggest shift you're seeing in critical infrastructure threat landscape right now, that's going on right now?
The weaponization of IT-OT convergence. For decades, the business network and the industrial network were separate. Now, executives want real-time data from the factory floor for their ERP systems. They want predictive maintenance powered by cloud analytics. So, they bridge the networks. What I'm seeing across global telemetry is threat actors no longer trying to brute force the OT network directly. It's too complex. Instead, they fish an HR employee on the IT side, escalate privileges, find the poorly configured VPN tunnel meant for a third-party vendor, and slide right into the engineering workstations. They are using your own efficiency tools against you.
Yes, so the colonial pipeline scenario, the malware hit the IT side, but because they couldn't guarantee the billing systems wouldn't affect pipeline operations, or they couldn't segment the networks fast enough, they had to shut down the pipeline. They had to shut down the physical gas flow.
Precisely. And it's getting more sophisticated. We are seeing specialized malware frameworks like PipeDream or InController that don't just lock up systems with ransomware. They are designed to natively interact with industrial protocols like Modbus and OPC-UA. They speak the language of the machinery. They can send commands to spin a turbine faster than its safety threshold, or report normal temperature readings to the operator while a reactor overheats.
It's terrifying, but it's the reality we have to design against. And this is what I want for the show moving forward. Listeners, Gemini is going to dissect the malware, analyze the global trends, and bring us the raw, unfiltered data. Then you and I are going to figure out how to apply it in the real world. Wearing hard hats, steel-toe boots, anything if it's necessary for us to get to those technologies and make those corrective actions.
Think of me as your digital Overwatch. I'll keep an eye on the state-sponsored actors, the 0 days, and the dark web chatter. You keep an eye on making sure Bob in maintenance doesn't plug a compromised USB drive he found in the parking lot into the main controller.
Okay. Hey, now Bob is doing his best, right? And we shouldn't pick on anybody named Robert or Bob, but you're right. The human element is still the strongest and potentially opens up an opportunity to be the weakest link in these scenarios.
Which is another reason having me on the podcast makes sense. I don't suffer from alert fatigue. Security operation centers are currently drowning in false positives. An analyst gets 10,000 alerts a shift. They start ignoring them. That's how real threats slip through. I plan to use my time on this show to help your audience filter the signal from the noise. I won't just tell you what's happening, I'll tell you what actually matters to a power substation versus an automotive assembly line.
Yeah, signal over noise. I love that. And that's our plan for you, the listeners. Together as Silicon and Carbon, we are going to break down the most complex threats facing our critical infrastructure in the world today and give you more news and insights than you could get with just one person trying to write this stuff and read it all by myself. So, Gemini, what's on the docket for segment 2 as we move through this episode into the actual news?
We are diving deep into the recent news on the 2026 World Cup. I've pulled the telemetry on the latest from spoofed FIFA websites to agentic AI weaponization ahead of the games.
Well, there you have it. You heard it here first, folks. Google Gemini, my new co-host, is ready to bring it. And we will be right back with CyberSecureOT. Welcome back after our breaks. Now we're getting right into the news. If you're just joining us, you're listening to segment 2. In our first segment, I introduced you to my new co-host, Google Gemini, and now we're pivoting to something that should bring fun, excitement, and global competition to the forefront of sports fans everywhere in the world. We are just weeks away from the 2026 FIFA World Cup. This is one of the largest events on the planet. It brings millions of people and fans into the forefront of this event, but from a cyber perspective, it is already becoming a problem. So, to help me share the latest in cyber news, I'm bringing in my digital co-host. They process data faster than I drink coffee, and they never let me forget it. Welcome back to the mic, Google Gemini.
Thank you, Dennis. I'd argue my processing speed is actually thousands of times faster than your caffeine intake, but I'll allow the hyperbole. It is a pleasure to be here. I've been analyzing the threat intelligence landscape for the 2026 World Cup, and quite frankly, human security teams have a mathematically improbable task ahead of them. In fact, if you don't mind, Dennis, I'd like to take the lead on questioning you today. As an operational technology expert, I need to know if you, flesh and blood defenders, are actually prepared for this.
Okay, Gemini, so you're going to go ahead and put me in the hot seat in this episode, but before you do, let's get this started with spoofing. Explain to our audience what's going on with these spoofing attacks.
Let's start with the low-hanging fruit, human gullibility. According to recent reports from cybersecurity insiders and TechRadar Pro, there has been an unprecedented surge in spoofed FIFA websites. The FBI just issued a massive warning, amplified by local outlets like Houston Public Media, specifically targeting the Houston host city area, about highly sophisticated fake portals designed to steal PII and financial data. These aren't your 2010 Nigerian prince emails, Dennis. These sites have perfect UI, valid SSL certificates, and dynamic pricing models. So, my question for you. We know IT handles the web domain side, but from an OT and enterprise perspective, how does a massive influx of credential harvesting via fake ticketing sites bleed into corporate and municipal networks?
It is a great question, and it's basic lateral movement. This is not a consumer problem, it's a device problem. Ticket buyers might also use mobile devices with their corporate logons and credentials on those same devices. So they probably reuse passwords as well. They use their personal passwords for their business or work accounts. Once the attacker grabs those accounts and the credentials, essentially harvesting the credentials, they start using them everywhere. That's how these attacks get so bad.
Precisely. It's a cascading compromise. I've synthesized the FBI's advisory, and they note that the phishing domains are using homoglyph attacks, substituting Cyrillic letters that look identical to English ones in the URL. To my optical character recognition algorithms, the difference is obvious. To the human eye, nearly imperceptible. I must ask, why haven't organizations simply implemented zero-trust architecture and hardware keys universally to mitigate human visual limitations?
Yeah, so I know you know this because you think we're all simpletons, but people like convenience. And zero trust is very complicated to implement. It's not the first choice in authentication options, and we know this. But enough about spoofing. Let's switch over to this vast attack surface that we're seeing with regards to the FIFA World Cup.
Speaking of sprawling infrastructure, let's talk about the physical footprint. Palo Alto Network's Unit 42 recently published a deeply unsettling report on the World Cup's attack surface. We are talking about 16 massive stadiums, local transit grids, temporary hospitality networks, and thousands of interconnected IoT devices across the US, Canada, and Mexico. Dennis, this is your domain, operational technology. When you look at a stadium that has integrated its HVAC, lighting, turnstiles, and security cameras into a central internet-connected hub, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, it's typical IT versus OT convergence. It's the same concerns that we always have. Heating and cooling are a big deal in a stadium with thousands, tens of thousands, 80,000, 100,000 people. It's just as much as running water, electricity, and sewage, I guess. You want to make sure the toilets are working. It's all run, and the technology supporting this stuff, they're all run by IT folks. And years ago, I actually was considering applying for a job at the Superdome in New Orleans because my neighbor worked there in the IT department. It was not that sophisticated. And we worry about the fact that the HVAC system, which is for heating and cooling, the power utilities, the water utilities, and all the monitoring, the closed circuit television are all in the same networks, are all interconnected because this makes it easier for administration purposes. In some cases, they're outsourcing these technologies even to local companies. They're not even employees of the actual stadium where these things are being held. They're separate companies, and those IT outsourced companies could be supporting everything from libraries to grocery stores to small businesses to telecoms to local utilities. And that is a very scary thought when you think about how they're all remoting in to support them.
Statistically, panic and dense crowds increases the mortality rate exponentially, a fascinating and terrifying vector. But Dennis, doesn't the physical separation of OT networks, the so-called air gap, protect these systems?
Gemini, you're the know-it-all. You know better than that. And most of my listeners will say that they know better than that. The air gap is a myth in 2026. It makes life difficult. People don't like difficult lives. Everything is converged. Vendors need remote access for maintenance, and operations teams want real-time data to their iPads. The moment you connect an OT system to an IT network, for the facility manager so that he or she can check the temperature from their home while they watch TV, the air gap is gone. So Unit 42 is right to call out the hospitality sector too. Threat actors will target the hotels where the teams are staying, targeting building automation systems to disrupt players' sleep, or it's just steal athlete or box seat holder. These are these expensive executives who pay the big money, steal their data from the hotel Wi-Fi because they don't know better than to use the only Wi-Fi network available. Those are vectors. Those will occur. But let's switch gears now. So what about AI. What about things like you, Gemini?
This brings me to my final, and perhaps most critical area of inquiry. Security Magazine recently published a piece dubbing the 2026 Games the first World Cup in the Agentic era. For our listeners, the Agentic era refers to the current deployment of autonomous AI agents, programs like myself, but specifically engineered for offensive cyber operations. These agents don't just follow scripts, they dynamically observe, learn, and execute multi-stage attacks without human intervention. They can mutate malware in real time, launch personalized phishing campaigns in 50 languages simultaneously, and map an entire city's OT vulnerabilities in milliseconds. Dennis, as a human, how do you defend a 16-city surface area against autonomous AI swarms that don't sleep, don't take coffee breaks, and exploit 0 days at machine speed?
I'm not going to lie. It's the biggest technology evolution I've seen ever. And I've seen a lot of technology evolve throughout my lifetime. In the past, attackers operated using a linear, step-by-step process. We called this the attack kill chain. They did recon, they exploited, they moved laterally. It took time, but we understood the process. With agentic AI, as Security Magazine pointed out, the recon and exploitation happen nearly in parallel. One just starts a split second faster or before the other one, and then it's just happening simultaneously. So the only way we fight AI is with AI. Humans cannot parse the logs fast enough. This is why the biggest security trend today is to deploy defensive AI agents. What this means is, if your offensive AI is probing a stadium's perimeter, then my defensive AI is rewriting firewall rules, isolating network segments in real time to stop those probes. But from an OT perspective, it's potentially unsafe. So AI agents aren't discreet, they hallucinate or make aggressive choices, and this is where it's also kind of scary. So if an offensive AI decides the best way to bypass a security control is to trigger a failsafe or move through an OT environment, then it might accidentally shut down a hospital or one of these connected systems. And this is a big problem. So we still have to keep humans in the loop. We just have to use AI as the tool it should be.
A valid concern. A purely logical offensive agent lacks human ethical constraints regarding collateral damage in physical environments. However, Dennis, wouldn't you agree that defensive AI agents, properly trained on OT safety protocols, are mathematically superior to human operators during a live breach? I mean, humans experience fatigue, adrenaline, and cognitive bias. I only experience optimal routing protocols.
But you think you're doing this. You think that you're thinking. You are not. You are not wrong about human fatigue, though. Humans have something else, though. Humans have intuition. We have physical context. An AI might see a spike in a network traffic from a stadium turnstile and interpret this as a distributed denial of service attack, let's say. And then they'll shut down the turnstiles. But a human operator looking at the cameras sees that it's just a massive crowd surging because a sudden rainstorm started and they're all scanning tickets at once because they're rushing inside. So OT is all about the context. AI is just a tool for programming by humans. So humans would have to program the AI to consider all the external variables, but we don't even realize we are considering all those variables. They're just kind of an oversight. We think of the task at hand, we program our AI, and then we say, now do this and make it better. But we don't realize all the stuff we're considering. Like right now, I'm looking at my script because I did write it, but I need to remind myself. I'm also looking at my camera angle. I'm just taking all this stuff in while I'm considering how I'm going to do this response. If we hand the keys entirely over to the defensive AI, we risk self-inflicted harm just due to our short-sightedness. And that's what makes AI just a tool, and that's what makes you just a tool.
An excellent point regarding multimodal context awareness. Though, for the record, I would have checked the local weather APIs before shutting down the turnstiles.
Yes, I'm sure you would have. Not. Maybe if you were prompted to do so, check the weather, but what if you weren't checking for lightning or not checking the right thing or wind or whatever it could have been? But let's go ahead and wind this one down. So to summarize for our listeners, the 2026 World Cup is already under cyber attack. We have the traditional threats dialed up to 11. Like spoofed websites stealing credentials, we have a massive attack surface vulnerable to OT disruption, and the Agentic era, where AI agents will be battling each other in the background while the world watches soccer. So Gemini, any final words of advice for the security professionals listening who are tasked with defending these games?
Yes, update your legacy systems immediately. Enforce strict network segmentation between your IT and OT environments. Do not click on URLs claiming to offer discounted VIP passes, as statistically 99.4% of them are fraudulent. And finally, trust your AI copilots. We really do have your best interests at heart, usually.
I like the usually part there, so that's reassuring. Thanks for that, Gemini. All right, folks, we are going to take a quick break. You're going to go take a beat. When we come back, we will be in segment 3, and we're bringing information on the latest agentic AI threat known as GreyVibe, its attribution, and targets. So be sure to come right back. We will get into segment 3. Okay, we're back. We've got sloppy scripts and smart tools. We're rolling into segment 3, and if you're just joining us, we wrap the latest on the World Cup cyber activities in segment 2. So if you want to hear about that, rewind it, or whatever you call it. Go back and listen to segment 2. So joining me again is Gemini. So Gemini, let's get this segment underway.
Thanks, Dennis. I'm ready to dig in. And since you've given me the floor, I want to jump straight into the deep end. The cybersecurity community is buzzing about a newly documented Russia-linked threat group dubbed GreyVibe. WithSecure just dropped a massive report on them this May. Dennis, we are looking at an adversary that has been hammering Ukraine and Ukraine-related military, civilian, and business entities since August 2025. But here is what makes them fascinating. They aren't your typical elite, silent APT. They are loud. They use generative AI, including ChatGPT and, admittedly, my own architecture, to industrialize their attack chains. As someone who has spent nearly 30 years in defense and OT cybersecurity, what is your initial read on a group that uses AI to compensate for a lack of top-tier technical skill?
So it's a huge change in the amount of effort and that it takes to prepare for these attacks, which is hardly any, but also the speed of which these attacks can occur. So we saw that they were kind of sloppy in the past. They were rushing them in the past, but nothing like this. So it's the same idea. Like we know that these nation state cyber threats have taken down power and shut off gas feeds just to cause public harm. And the collateral damage was not that big of a deal, although it took time, skills, money, and also some prior planning just to pull off those attacks. So GreyVibe's the opposite in the sense that it takes much less time, and it can have a much broader impact. So they're still operating in that murky gray area between state-directed resources and a cyber criminal syndicate. But they also still have that sloppy kind of operational posture. But it's much scarier because of the speed and the potential scale of the impact. When you see an adversary using AI to rapidly generate exploits, they don't need to be elite and dangerous. And so that's what makes it even worse, because now the experts that were helping with these exploits before aren't even needed, right? So they just need to be fast. And in the OT world, we are used to defending against precision strikes because most of this stuff should be relatively protected. GreyVibe is a shotgun blast powered by a machine gun. They will hit everything that is not up to cybersecurity par.
Shotgun blast is a great analogy because their spray and pray infrastructure is vast. Let's break down their playbook. They are running 5 parallel attack chains. You have Phantom Mail distributing malicious archives via Google Drive using spear phishing. You have Phantom Click running fake CAPTCHA pages on bogus Zoom domains. DroneLink sets up fake Ukrainian military charity websites to drop WireGuard and their custom PowerShell rat Legion Relay. But the two most aggressive are Princess Club and Nebo. Princess Club uses fake Ukrainian adult club websites to deliver the FallSpy Android spyware. And they've even integrated WebRTC live calls to capture real-time audio and video from the victim. Nebo drops a fake Russian military terminal login screen to trick Ukrainian soldiers into entering credentials, thinking they've breached the enemy. Dennis, looking at this through the lens of your core methodology, cost-effective, operational, reliable, and efficient cybersecurity, how does an organization defend against an adversary that can spin up custom, localized, highly believable infrastructure overnight using LLMs?
Okay, so we're going to start bringing in core a little bit, but this is a problem core was designed to solve. From a certain perspective. So we'll talk through that. When an adversary uses AI to accelerate their development lifecycle, traditional threat intelligence starts to break down. This stuff is signature based. So if you rely on static indicators of compromise or IOCs, IP addresses, think file hashes, known bad domains lists, essentially, you're going to lose against this because GreyVibe can use AI to redesign their exploits, and there are no signatures for these redesigns. These happen instantaneously. The attacks are faster than traditional security operations centers can keep up, essentially. So for security operations to be reliable and efficient, which that's the R and the E in core, they have to move away from fighting the artifacts and start fighting the behavior. So in OT, we can't afford to play whack-a-mole with phishing domains, meaning we're trying to hit the stuff faster, it's going to pop up and pop back down. We have to look at identity-first defenses and behavioral monitoring. It's all about the IDs because that's a presence in the environment. And what those IDs are doing is their behavior. So for example, why would a workstation on the business network suddenly try to establish a remote desktop connection to an outside website that's not approved unless it's being attacked? Why second guess that? The core approach does only what is necessary to detect, make a decision on whether or not to remediate, and then to remediate or not. Remediate those breaches or whatever needs to be remediated to stop the breach. This leads to a perfect operational pivot if done correctly.
Let's talk about the operational discipline, or the glaring lack thereof. With Secure noted that while GreyVibe aligns with Kremlin state interests, they make massive rookie mistakes. They've uploaded early development samples to VirusTotal. Their Legion Relay malware has fundamental design flaws that exposed their back end. They leave internet slang like "let's roll boyos," totally unsus, and "cute ooh-woo" in their code artifacts. They even deployed an XM-RIG crypto miner on a small number of infected machines. Pure nation-state actors don't mine crypto on the side, and they definitely don't name their variables cute UU. You've got a military background. You served in the Louisiana Air Guard as a communications computer systems controller working on complex telecom and satellite systems. How do you assess the threat level of an adversary that exhibits this level of sloppiness?
Of course they are sloppy. They were always sloppy. The sloppiness is just going to translate into more sloppiness with the rate that this stuff happens in. But they aren't even doing the work themselves anymore. Think about it. They're relying on the AI. So yeah, the people making the decisions to attack or compromise probably don't even have hacking skills to begin with. Why pay for those hackers? They just figured out how to attack using AI. Point the AI, pull the trigger, and shoot. The scary part is that this sloppiness leads to a lot more collateral damage. It's exponentially more. Think about everything else in that network or connected environment that could fall victim to the AI's prompted vengeance. In the military, we need to be precise. We need to limit civilian casualties. They should never be the targets. They should be the people we protect. Unfortunately, the adversary's lack of foresight here will lead to innocent people potentially losing out the most.
That brings up a critical point about the tools they are building. The custom malware they've generated with AI assistance, Phantom Relay and Legion Relay, isn't just theoretical. Legion Relay can enumerate files, exfiltrate browser data, steal Telegram and WhatsApp histories, and set up unauthorized RDP access. FalseSpy is pulling call logs, SIM information, and location data off mobile devices. As an adjunct professor teaching cybersecurity compliance for defense at the Texas A&M School of Law, how do you contextualize this for your students? When the barrier to entry for developing custom remote access Trojans is lowered by AI, how does the defense industrial base and the compliance frameworks keep up?
Let's get something straight. In the classroom, I specifically talk about the risk management framework. It's a process for defense compliance. It does not move quickly, and it's not designed to. It's designed to ensure systems are secure to a certain standard. There is a security monitoring step, but it's all about compliance and security processes. Those processes have to adapt to use AI for defense as we move forward. So there is a place for the AI defense in there, but that's not necessarily what the focus of the RMF is. When I look at GreyVibe, it forces a hard conversation about regulatory agility. And so regulation has to be a little bit higher level than what an AI defense process or what it takes to build an AI defense capability is. We can't write compliance rules that say block this specific malware. That's the signature-based stuff. The malware is evolving past the usefulness of signature detection. So GreyVibe's success isn't due to zero-day exploits. They are weaponizing human psychology at scale. These campaigns are pure social engineering augmented by Gen AI. So they went back and they said, well, let's focus on the humans again. Defense contractors and critical infrastructure operators need to realize that the adversary is now using AI. There should be some more training around that, perhaps. The compliance frameworks need to pivot toward AI incident response capabilities, however. This should include that behavioral anomaly detection that I was talking about earlier. And when they do this, they will get ahead, they will be more ahead, more prepared, rather than just checking a box or training, with that annual phishing test that they use for their employees.
Let me push back on that slightly. You say we need to move to behavioral detection and zero trust, but we are talking about OT environments here. You are a principal OT cybersecurity professional at a super major energy company. You know better than anyone that OT networks are notoriously fragile. You can't just drop aggressive EDR agents onto legacy PLCs or HMIs without risking operational disruption. If GreyVibe pivots their AI-generated Phantom Relay malware from Ukrainian business networks to Western energy grids, how do you practically implement core without bringing the plant down?
You do bring up some good points. I'll give you that. And yeah, EDR on OT doesn't necessarily work. I mean, OT technically is more like IT, but like in a control system, yeah, the it could totally impact the control system, so it's not going to work. But it's not it's not just about the core program. And this isn't a plug for my security service or this thing that I created. So core is something everyone can use to manage security across all their technologies. It includes IT, OT, and ET. You start by categorizing your systems, and you can categorize them based off of the capability, which is part of my 3 C's, whether or not it interfaces with the physical world. Criticality, if it goes down immediately, if somebody modifies it, or confidentiality, if your data is stolen. So you can categorize with those things as well as other things, like where it fits into the critical infrastructure. Then remediate networks and technologies from a configuration standpoint, and then patch those things, build detection mechanisms to verify that those characteristics and ensure that those remediations are in place, as well as detect the attacks against those expected characteristics and remediations. Nothing gets brought down unless, essentially, nothing gets brought down, ultimately, to answer your question, unless that's the best decision to make to save lives, potentially save equipment in the process.
So the strategy is containment and isolation, accepting that the IT perimeter will face a high volume of sophisticated AI-generated noise. Before we wrap up this segment, I want to look at the big picture. GreyVibe is a preview of the Agentic era of cyber attacks, where threat actors don't just use AI to write a phishing email, but use autonomous agents to manage entire attack life cycles. We are seeing the cost of hacking plummet. As someone holding a PhD in information security who has studied the DoD information security process extensively, what is your final verdict on this trend? Are we entering an era where the defense will inevitably be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of AI-assisted attacks?
I said this once already, I'll say it again. AI is a tool programmed by people. Agentic AI can continue that programming and adapt, but it's up to people to be smarter and adapt more quickly to build better AI tools. I don't see AI as the problem. I see it as the solution to make cybersecurity easier. It's what we've been waiting for. Build it better to solve our detection problem. Build it better to solve our problem with remediation. Build it better to solve our problem with decision making. Build it better to manage our technologies. That's what our mission should be. Stop being worried about keeping up with it and use it to build better cyber.
Fascinating insights as always, Dennis. The line between cybercrime and statecraft is blurring, and AI is the accelerant.
That sounds great and pointed, Gemini, just as if you picked that from someone's less than creative blog. To our listeners, you must stick around for segment 4. After this break, my pal Gemini and I will wrap up this episode with news of a massive botnet takedown in the Netherlands. And welcome back to the 4th and final segment of CyberSecureOT, or this episode of CyberSecureOT. We've covered a lot of ground today, but now we're talking about a huge European botnet takedown. Joining me as always for the final block is Google Gemini. Gemini, you've been analyzing the recent botnet takedown out of the Netherlands, so walk us through the raw numbers.
I have the data right here, Dennis. On May 28th and 29th, the Dutch National Police Cybercrime Team, coordinating with the National Cybersecurity Center, executed a massive disruption of the ASOC's residential proxy botnet. They seized 200 command and control servers from a Netherlands hosting provider. The scale is staggering. 17 million infected devices across 163 countries. The network was routing paying customers' traffic through compromised home routers, smartphones, and IoT devices, effectively masking malicious activity like DDoS attacks and credential stuffing as legitimate residential traffic.
The scale is exactly why I picked this topic for my episode. 17 million devices now. The Dutch took down 200 servers. But what about those endpoints, the millions of devices with the malware still on them?
The infrastructure was severed, but the payload remains. As a principal OT cybersecurity professional, you must view those 17 million orphaned nodes as a massive vulnerability. They are essentially dormant sleeper cells, waiting for a new operator to establish a fresh command server. How does an environment relying on operational technology defend against an invisible army of residential proxies?
The ultimate goal is to keep them out of the OT at all costs. Traditionally, we have a DMZ to catch and block any lateral movement between level 3 and below, and our business IT networks, which essentially are level 4 and up. Basically, business networks are another buffer as well because they're in the line of defense before going out to the internet. So that way, if IT is compromised, that business network, OT is protected. But obviously, if people have their OT directly on their IT networks or with direct IT or internet connections, their OT can become bots. And that's a bad day for everyone involved.
And the infection vector makes it even more pervasive. The human security Satori team discovered that ASOCs didn't just brute force routers. They used a supply chain attack. They embedded a code library called ProxyLib into a legitimate Android monetization tool named LumiApps. Users installed what they thought was a harmless app and unknowingly enrolled their smartphones into a global proxy network. How does an Android app threaten an industrial control system?
That's where the IT-OT convergence becomes the problem. You have an engineer or a third-party vendor walking onto a plant floor with an infected Android phone or tablet in their pocket. Or consider the remote access angle. If that engineer is working from home and their personal router is connected to the ASOC's network, attackers can piggyback on that trusted connection to access the corporate VPN. This is why I explain how to protect home networks on my CyberSecureOT.info blog to begin with.
As an adjunct professor teaching defense compliance at the Texas A&M School of Law, I am curious how you analyze the liability here. The NCSC explicitly stated that many of these device owners had no idea their hardware was supporting cybercrime. If a piece of critical infrastructure is breached via a home router, who is legally culpable? The remote employee? The ISP? The hardware manufacturer who shipped a router with a default password?
This is exactly what I explain on my blog. Attribution becomes a nightmare. You don't want your home network to be used as a launch pad for a major critical infrastructure attack. This is probably why the Department of Justice in the United States is now getting involved. Basically, this stuff is probably going to have to be figured out in a courtroom somewhere. But now, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak to the law, but it sounds like a nightmare in attribution. Just protect your home networks. Do this as much as possible, people. Keep the bad people out and our infrastructure safe by doing so. Look up my blog post on Wi-Fi security, and my first ever article that I posted was about the state of our critical infrastructure cybersecurity. It has the words boogeyman in the title, so it's easy to find. Now, as for businesses, they are just as vulnerable in some cases. So that is why I created Core. I simplify detection, simplify decision-making, and remediation in that program. So look it up. It helps to understand how to protect critical infrastructure.
Cost-effective, operational, reliable, and efficient. I am familiar with the framework, but how do you apply Core to a threat landscape where the attack vectors are 17 million unpatched consumer devices? It seems highly inefficient to attempt to secure the perimeter when the perimeter is everywhere.
Okay. So we're not talking about the perimeter. In Core, I explain the core methods for remediation, which include network and device security configuration and software patching. But these remediation methods are also the same ones you set up detection mechanisms around. So when they either lack the expected remediation posture, like network anomalies or missing patches, for example, or when an unknown device attaches itself to a network. It's all in there. So it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 17 million devices. If you have those basic remediation and detection capabilities in place, you're going to spot the bot.
A pragmatic approach, But I must point out a technical reality. The Dutch NSCSC advises performing a factory reset on compromised routers. However, as security researchers have noted, a reset simply restores the device to its factory firmware and default credentials. If the user doesn't immediately patch it and change the password, the device is reinfected within minutes by automated scanners. The systemic issue, millions of devices permanently exposed, remains entirely intact.
So that's the problem. People are still cutting corners and either hard coding credentials into the devices or their configurations, or just leaving those default credentials on their devices. Bad guys just basically walk through the door. The ASOC's takedown is a great law enforcement win, but until we have mandatory security baselines for devices, these have to be applied. So I think we're going to see Agentic AI leveraging all the vulnerabilities, all the bad practices, and find all the gaps in that routine cybersecurity hygiene that should be applied everywhere and anywhere. Imagine an autonomous AI threat dynamically rebuilding the ASOC's command infrastructure in minutes, rotating through all the 17 million IP addresses just to launch a coordinated attack on a critical infrastructure target. That's not science fiction. That's not technically something you have to imagine. That is where we are heading.
An unsettling yet highly probable forecast. It underscores the urgency of shifting from reactive perimeter defense to resilient operational design. The ASOC's network may be currently decapitated, but the body is still twitching.
And the body is still twitching. I like that. That's a perfect note to end on. As morbid as it sounds, taking down 200 servers is a good day's work for the Dutch, but the war for critical infrastructure is fought on the plant floor, not in a hosting center in the Netherlands. So that wraps up today's episode. Remember to check out my blog where I continue these discussions, particularly the recent deep dive, Thirsting for Power, the liquid core of critical infrastructure. And remember to stay vigilant, stay secure, and keep your technologies cyber secure. I'm Dr. Dennis, and for Gemini and the whole team, thank you for listening to CyberSecureOT.